Among the ranks of the German army was one of its most important formations, the Sixth Army, known for its combat effectiveness and lightning tactics. It was hailed as a pillar of Hitler's war machine amid the chaos and carnage of World War II. The German Sixth Army became a formidable force, one of the most effective combat armies in history, eclipsing many of its contemporaries. To put it in perspective, Patton's Third Army, famous for its strength, was composed of about 6 infantry divisions, 3 armored divisions, and various support units, such as independent armored cavalry regiments, engineer battalions, and artillery battalions. In contrast, the magnitude and power of the Sixth Army loomed even larger over the battlefield, consolidating itself as a true monster of its era. However, even this giant of military power would soon face its ultimate test, with almost all members facing certain death. Music, the Sixth Army, under the command of General Walter von Reichenau, emerged in the military landscape on October 10, 1939. Its creation came as a result of the transformation of the 10th Army, a large force that had already entered into action during the invasion of Poland. When General Reichenau took command, the Sixth Army inherited a legacy of combat experience and capability, laying the foundation for its future exploits. Throughout the invasion of the Netherlands, the Sixth Army demonstrated great combat effectiveness, operating with paratroopers to dismantle the formidable fortifications strategically located in Abanel-Lee and Namur, key locations in the fierce Battle of Belgium. Their efforts were important in paving the way for the German advance as the campaign progressed. The Sixth Army remained a resilient force that broke through the difficult defenses by June 12, 1940, marking a major turning point. Subsequently, the Army seamlessly transitioned to the northern flank, where it provided crucial support to German forces along the rugged coast of Normandy, playing a key role in the final stages of the intense battle for France. Music, the Sixth Army, entrusted with a crucial role in Operation Barbarossa, served as the vanguard of the Southern Army Group, delving deep into Soviet territory with determination and strategic insight. However, tragedy struck with the sudden loss of General Reichenau, whose promising leadership was cut short by a fatal plane crash while being transferred for medical attention after suffering a heart attack in January 1942. After Reichenau's death, command fell to General Friedrich Paulus, an experienced strategist who had previously served as Rau's chief of staff. Under Paulus's leadership, the Sixth Army continued its relentless advance eastward, navigating the challenges of the harsh Eastern Front with determination. It was during this period that the Sixth Army achieved a major triumph in the Second Battle of Kiev in the spring of 1942, thanks to strategic maneuvers and coordinated efforts. Paulus and his troops secured a decisive victory, further consolidating their position as a challenging force in the theater of war. This success not only boosted morale within the ranks, but also highlighted the key role of the Sixth Army in the conflict on the Eastern Front. On June 28, 1942, Army Group South initiated Operation Case Blue, which marked the beginning of the offensive in southern Russia. The main objectives of this ambitious operation were twofold: to take control of the crucial oil fields located in Baku and Aban, and to capture the city of Stalingrad, of great strategic importance on the banks of the Volga River. These objectives were considered vital not only to secure vital resources, but also to protect the advancing forces as they moved into the Caucasus. Music, 389th Infantry Division. I have seen more blood than I should have. The battles preceding Stalingrad have been fierce, and each has left its mark on both the land and us, the men who fought in it. But as we approach the city, there is anticipation mixed with apprehension. To us, Stalingrad looms like a giant, with its labyrinthine streets and towering buildings awaiting us. We have seen Kiev, but this city is much bigger. The idea of what awaits us fills me with a mixture of fear and resolve. We have been told that victory in Stalingrad will be swift, that once we break through the city's defenses, the enemy will collapse before us. But I know that I must not underestimate our opponents, the Soviet soldiers. are fierce and determined. They fight tooth and nail for every inch of ground. And Stalingrad is bigger than we thought, but again, we all hope they have taken refuge behind the Volga. How much longer can Ivan fight? Even so, I cling to the hope that this will all be over soon, that we will emerge from Stalingrad victorious and unscathed. I draw strength from the camaraderie of my fellow soldiers, from knowing that we fight not only for ourselves, but for the homeland, in preparation for the crucial attack on Stalingrad. Hitler carefully selected the elite Sixth Army, led by General Friedrich Paulus, as the spearhead of the operation in mid-September. After a relentless advance that led them to break through the Soviet outer defenses, the Sixth Army found itself within the city limits. However, this marked the beginning of significant challenges. Unlike the vast expanses of Russia, where German armored units thrive thanks to their ability to maneuver effectively, Stalingrad presented a different battlefield. Its urban landscape, characterized by a maze of narrow streets and towering buildings, contrasted with the open plains to which the German forces were accustomed. This change of terrain demanded a radical adjustment of tactics and strategy, posing a formidable obstacle for German commanders and their troops as they moved through the treacherous confines of the city. The entire city was a labyrinth due to the relentless aerial bombardment led by General Oberwurm von Richthofen during the summer and fall of 1942 stood as the most formidable air unit in the world. In a span of 48 hours, approximately 1,000 tons of bombs fell on Stalingrad, surpassing even the intensity of the bombings suffered by London. The exact number of civilian casualties remains uncertain. Stalin initially ordered that no one could leave the city. You must stay and defend it. Many civilians, estimated at around 40,000, were taken to Germany as war workers, while some managed to escape during the chaos of battle and a few were evacuated by Soviet forces in February 1943. The surviving civilian population was reduced to between 6,000 and 10,000 people. August 29th marked a culminating moment when the German 4th Armored Army broke into the Soviet lines, breaching a major point 15 miles south of the besieged city of Stalingrad. This bold advance marked a critical moment in the campaign, signaling the German forces' intention to quickly invade the strategic heart of the region. Just 2 days later, on August 31st, 1942, the relentless drive of the 4th German Panzer Armada brought its tanks to the outskirts of Stalingrad, reaching the vital Stalingrad-Moroz Railway. This strategic position prepared the German forces for a possible advance into the city's heart. However, in response to the growing threat, Soviet General Andrei Yamano quickly orchestrated a strategic retreat, pushing the 62nd and 64th Soviet armies back towards the confines of Stalingrad. This tactical maneuver aimed to avoid the encirclement of Soviet forces and reinforce the city's defenses against the imminent German attack. As tension increased, on September 3rd, 1942, a significant event occurred. The 6th German Army and the 4th Panzer Army finally established a crucial link near Stalingrad. Despite this achievement, their aspirations to breach the city's defenses met fierce resistance, as Soviet forces fiercely rejected their attempts to penetrate the fortified urban citadel. September 7th, 1942, marked a crucial moment when units of the powerful 6th German Army began their advance through Stalingrad's war-torn streets. Fierce battles were fought in the city, which was getting closer to the vital banks of the Volga River. This relentless advance towards the heart of the city marked a culminating phase in the battle, as the German forces sought to reinforce their control over the strategic artery of the Volga, a vital line for the Soviet resupply efforts. On September 10th, the 29th German Motorized Infantry Division executed a bold maneuver that managed to encircle the 64th Soviet Army south of Stalingrad. This strategic blow further aggravated the challenges faced by Soviet defenders, cutting off crucial supply lines and isolating key pockets of resistance. In a strategic reorganization, Lieutenant General Vasily Traub assumed command of the newly formed 62nd Soviet Army, stationed on the east bank of the Volga River, in Stalingrad, south of Russia. Chukov's leadership would prove fundamental in the coming urban war, as he strove to rally his troops and firmly defend the besieged city against the relentless German attack. General Friedrich Paulus, commander of the 6th German Army, launched a new offensive on September 12th, directing intense aerial and artillery bombardments against the city. His ground forces advanced rapidly and took control of Mamayev-Kurgan, known as Hill 102, which dominated the city. This elevated position had great tactical significance, as it served as a central point in the defense of Stalingrad. For centuries, its capture by German forces precipitated a fierce struggle for control, as both sides fought to dominate this strategic point. The loss of Mamayev-Kurgan threatened to grant the Germans unrestricted access to the river, de facto cutting off the main Soviet resupply artery and intensifying pressure on the besieged defenders. So far, our advance in Stalingrad. Let me give you an idea of how hard it is. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. We are advancing slowly, taking each block one at a time. Sometimes it seems that we move at a snail's pace, but we have to keep our heads up. Our Panzer Division is struggling. We are running out of heavy ammunition, which is a great difficulty for our operations. We are counting the hours left for the resupply to arrive. It's like waiting for a lifeline in the middle of this chaos. But let me tell you something about the guys I fight with. We have created a bond difficult to describe. We depend on each other, and we entrust our lives to each other. It's what keeps us standing when things get tough. Of course, there is fear of the unknown, fear of what awaits us around the corner. But there's also determination. We are here for a reason, and we are not going to give up. After all, we are soldiers, and this is what we have been trained for. But I hope we get through it sooner or later. Many of our best soldiers die every day, but we will keep going. We will keep fighting until the job is done. It is a promise that we have made to each other and that we intend to fulfill. September 14th witnessed a dramatic turn of events in the distressing Battle of Stalingrad, when the 62nd Soviet Army launched a counterattack at dawn. However, despite their brave efforts, Soviet forces were eventually repelled by relentless German troops, who quickly cornered them in a narrow strip along the devastated banks of the Volga River. This setback aggravated the increasingly precarious situation faced by the besieged Soviet defenders, who struggled to resist the relentless attack unleashed by advancing German forces. Meanwhile, on the opposite bank of the Volga River, the 13th Soviet Guard Rifle Division executed a bold maneuver, crossing the treacherous waters in barges amid fierce aerial and artillery bombardment. Their objective was to frustrate the advance of the 71st and 76th German divisions, which sought to break the lines of the besieged 62nd Soviet Army and secure a foothold along the vital Volga River. This desperate gamble reflected the tenacity and determination of the Soviet defenders, who fought tooth and nail to repel the threat posed by the relentless German attack. When the sun rose on September 15th, the besieged defenders of Stalingrad prepared for another day of fierce fighting. German infantry units launched repeated assaults against the formidable hill of Mamayev-Kurgan, a strategic point that dominated the city, in an attempt to gain a decisive foothold. However, despite their tireless efforts, the German forces were rejected again and again by the firm Soviet defense that fought perseveringly to maintain control of this strategic point. The ensuing clashes took a heavy toll on both sides, with a growing number of casualties amid the chaos and carnage of the urban battlefield. In other parts of the conquered city, German infantry units advanced through the rugged terrain of the Terek River Gorge, drawing closer to the vital banks of the Volga River. This relentless advance posed a serious threat to the besieged Soviet defenders, who found themselves trapped in a desperate struggle for survival against the inexorable German advance. As the battle intensified, the fate of Stalingrad hung by a thread, and each passing moment brought the besieged city closer to annihilation. On September 17th, a fierce confrontation occurred in Stalingrad, when German and Soviet forces engaged in intense fighting at key strategic locations throughout the city. The imposing Mamayev-Kurgan Hill, the crucial central station, the emblematic grain elevator, and the soon-to-be famous Pavlov's house became the center of intense fighting amid the chaos. The German troops advanced along the Tarita River, moving relentlessly towards the vital banks of the Volga River, where Soviet reinforcements were gathering to reinforce the city's defenses. The following day, September 18th, the 1st Soviet Guard Army and the 24th Army launched an assault against the German 8th Army Corps in Kotluban, 40 kilometers north of Stalingrad. However, their efforts were met with fierce resistance, as the German Stuka dive bombers wreaked havoc and decimated 41 of the 106 Soviet tanks committed to the attack on the heart of Stalingrad. The brutal house-to-house fighting continued unabated, causing heavy casualties on both sides. Undaunted by the setbacks, on September 19th, the 24th Army, the 66th Army, and the 1st Soviet Guard Army of the 1st Guard launched another desperate counterattack near Kotluban, north of Stalingrad, but their brave efforts were repelled by the formidable 14th German Panzer Corps. As the conflict intensified, on September 20th, the clashes resumed when the Soviet and German forces clashed fiercely at key strategic points, such as Mamoy, the KGN Hill, the Central Station, and the grain elevator, amid the extensive urban landscape. On September 22nd, the situation in Stalingrad was aggravated when advancing German troops divided the 62nd Soviet Army, which defended the city, in two and took control of almost the entire southern half of the city. The relentless German attack pushed the Soviet defenders to collapse amid the chaos. On September 23rd, the arrival of the 284th Soviet Rifle Division offered a ray of hope as they were transported across the Volga River to join the front. However, their arrival met fierce German resistance as enemy troops launched a relentless assault on the landing site. The next day, September 24th, a devastating blow occurred when the 94th German Infantry Division and the 24th Panzer Division effectively annihilated all Soviet units remaining in the southern pocket of Stalingrad, Russia, tightening the siege around the exhausted defenders as the end of September approached. On September 26th, German troops launched another fierce assault against Stalingrad, intensifying the relentless pressure on the besieged city and its defenders. On September 27th, 1942, the German unit LFTV-3 carried out its last bombing raid on Stalingrad before being transported back to Germany to receive training in glider towing, which meant a change of tactics in the midst of the increasingly intense conflict. The climax came on September 28th, when Sergeant Jacob Pavlov and his brave companions launched a daring assault on the heavily bombed apartment block in front of Solignaya Street, finally seizing it from the Germans who controlled it. This heroic act turned Pavlov's house into a symbol of resistance, resilience, and defiance, as the small group of defenders valiantly resisted relentless enemy attacks for 58 days, personifying the spirit of resistance in the midst of Stalingrad. October 3rd marked a crucial moment in the Battle of Stalingrad, as both German and Soviet forces suffered heavy losses amid the relentless advance of the German 6th Army, which was pushing the Soviet 62nd Army towards the banks of the Volga River. The fierce intensity of the conflict highlighted the stakes and the desperate struggle for control of the besieged city. The next day, October 4th, there was a significant escalation when the German 14th Panzer Division launched a daring assault on the Stalingrad tractor factory, a key industrial bastion in the city's heart. This strategic maneuver aimed to underscore Soviet production capacity and further undermine their resistance. On October 14th, the German assault on the Stalingrad tractor factory intensified with the relentless aerial bombardment of the LOF Flotter 4, which played a key role in assisting the advance of German forces. More than 2,000 sorties were carried out, unleashing devastating fire on Soviet positions and paving the way for German advance. The next day, October 15th, further aerial bombardments occurred when the German unit Luftwaffe carried out 3 bombing raids that reinforced the relentless assault on Soviet defenses. Meanwhile, the German Stuka dive bombers, in a formation of 4, launched 900 sorties against Soviet positions at the Stalingrad tractor factory, causing numerous casualties and decimating several Soviet regiments. The terrible toll of the war became evident on October 16th, 1942, when all the personnel of the 339th Soviet Infantry Regiment were annihilated by the relentless German air attacks in Stalingrad, which highlighted the brutal and relentless nature of the conflict. Music. As the month of October progressed, German troops made significant advances and took control of key industrial facilities, such as the Red October and barricade factories in the north of Stalingrad. On October 22, 1942, these strategic victories further consolidated German dominance in the region and dealt a severe blow to Soviet resistance. Encouraged by these successes, on October 25, 1942, Friedrich Paulus informed Adolf Hitler that the capture of Stalingrad was imminent and that the city would fall before November 10, 1942. In response, Hitler, from his headquarters Wolf, near Vienna, Ukraine, ordered that German units prepare to advance north once Stalingrad was conquered, demonstrating his confidence in the imminent victory. As the end of October approached, on October 31, 1942, Hitler abandoned his Verwolf headquarters and moved to the Wolf-Schanze headquarters in Rassenburg, Germany, as he remained confident that Stalingrad, Russia, would soon be under German control, signaling a culminating moment in the ongoing conflict. November 8, 1942, marked a significant shift in the air campaign, as numerous units of the German LOF FL-4 were relocated from the skies of Stalingrad to the Northern African theater. This strategic reallocation of air power reflected the evolving priorities of the German High Command amid the intensifying conflict on multiple fronts and the confidence that Stalingrad was about to fall into German hands. 3 days later, on November 11, 1942, a breakthrough was achieved when the 6th German Army reached the banks of the Volga River in Stalingrad with a 600-yard front near the iconic Red October steel factory. The German forces secured an important foothold in the heart of the besieged city. Meanwhile, in Germany, Adolf Hitler, during a celebration in a brewery, proclaimed that Stalingrad was about to fall into German hands, emphasizing his contempt for the name of the city as a factor in its music. Capture while I contemplate the Volga, whose waters are stained a deep crimson color with the blood of the fallen. I get a knot in my stomach. The Volga, much wider and more imposing than I had ever imagined from the photographs, seems to mock our efforts to conquer it. The distant sounds of gunfire and explosions constantly remind us that danger lurks around every corner and that death is never far. Our situation is not good. Supplies are running out, and ammunition is scarce. We have already lost many good men, and each day seems to bring more pain and suffering. The thought of what could happen if reinforcements do not arrive soon fills me with dread. How much longer can we hold out? How much more can we endure? And yet, despite the overwhelming difficulties before us, there is still a glimmer of hope in the hearts of all the soldiers who stand beside me. We may be battered, but we are not defeated. We will continue to fight. We will hold the line, and we will pray that help arrives before it is too late. However, the course of the battle changed rapidly on November 19, 1942, when the Soviets launched a surprise counterattack north and south of Stalingrad, with the aim of surrounding Friedrich Paulus's besieged 6th German Army, entrenched in the city. This daring maneuver caught the German forces by surprise and threatened to reverse their hard-won conquests amid the chaos that unfolded on November 20, 1942. The German group, Luftwaffe KG-55, carried out a reconnaissance mission over Stalingrad from its base in Morzovka. However, the mission was not without losses, as 2 aircraft did not return, highlighting the dangers faced by aircrews operating in the skies over the besieged city. Simultaneously, a second Soviet offensive was launched south of Stalingrad on the same day against the positions of the 4 Romanian Corps, further complicating the precarious situation of the German defenders. The encirclement of the 6th German Army was completed when Soviet mechanized and armored forces converged on Kalash nad Donu, breaking through the Romanian defenses and sealing the fate of the German forces trapped in the city. As the siege intensified, efforts to resupply the besieged German troops were redoubled. On November 25th, 11 aircraft from the airfields of Tatanskaya and Morova in the Rostov region transported a total of 75 tons of vital supplies, mainly fuel, to Stalingrad, which made it possible to maintain the besieged defenders amid the relentless Soviet attack. However, the adverse weather conditions Satinskaya and Morova in Rostov Oblast transported a total of 75 tons of vital supplies, mainly fuel, to Stalingrad, which made it possible to maintain the besieged defenders amid the relentless Soviet attack. However, the adverse weather conditions of November hampered German resupply efforts, as low cloud ceilings and periodic snowfall impeded aircraft operations, aggravating the dire situation faced by the surrounded German forces. Hitler, the newly appointed Chief of Staff of the Army, General Kurt Zeitler, found himself in a desperate situation and begged Hitler to allow the Sixth Army to attempt to break the siege in Stalingrad. But Hitler remained stubborn and declared, "I will not back down before the vulgar." Instead of a breakout, Hitler devised a plan to maintain the besieged Sixth Army, made up of approximately 20 German divisions, through aerial resupply missions, while sending relief troops under Field Marshal Manstein to advance towards Stalingrad from the south. Despite the guarantees of Hermann Göring, head of the Luftwaffe, that his air force could successfully carry out the resupply operations, the plan ran into insurmountable obstacles from the beginning. Adverse weather conditions kept the Luftwaffe on the ground that its air force could successfully carry out the resupply operations. The plan ran into insurmountable obstacles from the beginning. Adverse weather conditions forced supply planes to remain grounded, making them vulnerable to relentless attacks from anti-aircraft guns and Russian fighter planes. When they managed to take off, only a small part, barely 10% of the essential supplies, reached the besieged troops, which worsened their already desperate situation. Meanwhile, the relief troops of Field Marshal Manstein faced their own challenges as they advanced towards Stalingrad. Despite having achieved significant advances and having advanced to within 30 miles of the city, they were forced to halt their advance and eventually retreat to avoid the risk of being surrounded. Hitler's refusal to consider the possibility of a retreat from the Volga River, along with the impracticality and failure of his resupply plan, contributed to the worsening situation of the Sixth Army and sealed the fate of the German forces. Trapped within the confines of Stalingrad, as the harsh winter hardened, the situation of the German soldiers trapped in Stalingrad became increasingly desperate. Thousands of wounded and hungry soldiers succumbed to the brutal cold, freezing to death amid sub-zero temperatures that undermined their dwindling resolve. Recognizing the urgency of the situation, General Zeitler once again implored Hitler to allow the remnants of the Sixth Army to undertake an escape to the south, with the possibility of joining with the relief forces of Field Marshal Manstein. Zeitler painted a bleak picture for Hitler, detailing the appalling conditions and the cruel fate awaiting the trapped soldiers if no action was taken. However, Hitler remained firm and unmoved by his general's pleas. For him, Stalingrad was not only a strategic objective, but also a symbol of German strength and determination. The city had to be held at all costs, regardless of the suffering endured by the trapped soldiers. Hitler's unwavering determination to cling to Stalingrad at any price would ultimately seal the fate of the Sixth Army, condemning it to a desperate struggle for survival amid the relentless Russian winter. Earlier, when Manstein embarked on his desperate mission on December 12th, rushing towards Stalingrad with the certainty that the Soviets were approaching, the weight of responsibility weighed on his shoulders, and with each kilometer that passed, the urgency of his task became more pressing, realizing that time was running out. Upon arriving at only 48 kilometers from Stalingrad on December 21st, the reality of the situation hit Manstein hard. He knew that he could not maintain his position for long against the advancing Soviet forces. Every moment counted, and every decision was crucial. Without direct orders from Hitler to evacuate Stalingrad, Manstein faced a dilemma. He understood the imperative need to break the siege and join Paulus before it was too late. The fate of thousands of lives hung in the balance, and the responsibility weighed heavily on him. But Paulus, entrenched in the ruins of Stalingrad, made his own fateful decision without a direct order from Hitler to evacuate. He felt compelled to stay. They clung to the hope of relief that seemed increasingly distant with each passing day. For Manstein, it was a moment of profound frustration and despair. The opportunity to save his trapped comrades slipped through his fingers, frustrated by the chain of command and the obstinacy of a general determined to maintain his position as the Soviet siege tightened around Stalingrad. The consequences of Paulus's decision would become painfully evident. The Battle of Stalingrad would drag on, taking a heavy toll in suffering and death that would haunt the survivors for the rest of their days. For Manstein, the bitter taste of what could have been would linger long after the guns fell silent. December 1942 fell upon the soldiers trapped in Stalingrad like a relentless onslaught of despair and suffering. It was a month that would be etched in the annals of history as a total hell in which survival became a last, desperate attempt for those who still clung to hope. The sporadic air bridges offered a glimpse of salvation, but for the vast majority, escape remained an unattainable dream. Thousands of soldiers were embroiled in a brutal struggle for survival with no end in sight. Each day brought new horrors, new losses, and the specter of death stalking them like a sinister reaper. The relentless Soviet propaganda that resonated through the city's loudspeakers served as a constant reminder of their situation. Every 7 seconds, a German soldier dies. The chilling message resonated among the ruins, a somber reckoning of the exact price of war. But it was not only the physical battles that took victims. The mental anguish weighed on every soul trapped within Stalingrad's crumbling walls. The constant fear, the atrocious hunger, the cold that chilled to the bone, all conspired to break the spirit of even the bravest soldiers. Amid the chaos and despair, desperate battles were fought beneath the city streets, where soldiers sought refuge in the dark confines of the sewers. There, in the damp and dirt, they fought tooth and nail against the enemy and the elements, willing to do anything to escape death's cold embrace. The idea of Manstein coming to their rescue persisted in the minds of thousands, like a ray of light in a desolate landscape. But as December progressed, that hope faded with each passing day, until even the most fervent believers began to doubt that salvation would ever come. My unit is decimated, mere shadows of the proud soldiers we once had been. Friends and comrades lie motionless around me, their lifeless eyes fixed on the gray sky. We fought bravely, but it was not enough. The Soviet onslaught was relentless, pushing us block by block until there was nowhere left to retreat. I don't even dare to dream of escape. The enemy surrounds us on all sides, their artillery bombarding our positions day and night. There is no rest, no hope of relief. I have seen the despair in the eyes of my fellow soldiers, the realization that we are trapped, doomed to perish in this hellish landscape. Food is scarce, rationed to the bare minimum to subsist. We scavenge what we can from the abandoned buildings, but even that is not enough to fill our empty stomachs. Each day is a struggle to survive, to cling to life amid chaos and desperation. But perhaps worst of all is knowing that, even if by some miracle we manage to escape this nightmare, only the harsh reality of captivity or death on the battlefield would await us. The idea of not seeing my home again weighs heavily on my heart, a burden hard to bear. Why me? Why us? And so I sit here, tired and shattered, surrounded by the ghosts of my fallen comrades. I don't know what tomorrow will bring, only that it will be full of more suffering and pain in the depths of Stalingrad, among the rubble and despair. I have lost all hope. There is no way out, trapped in this damned war. On December 23rd, the troops of Erich von Manstein began their retreat to Castelnuovo, from where they prepared their next offensive. The strategic retreat marked a crucial moment, as the German forces regrouped to bolster their defenses and launch a counteroffensive against the advancing Soviet troops. The following day, December 24th, a series of critical events occurred. Soviet tanks launched a fierce attack against the German defensive lines at the Tatsinskaya airfield in the Rostov region. This airfield was a crucial supply line for the German forces besieged in Stalingrad. Despite valiant efforts, the German defenses were breached, leading to the loss of vital aircraft and supplies. Meanwhile, a similar Soviet offensive targeted the Morozovsk airfield in the Rostov region, but the German forces successfully repelled the attack, preventing its capture. Simultaneously, Soviet troops launched an offensive against the German Army Group Don, near Stalingrad, breaking through the lines of the 4th Romanian Army and further increasing the intensity of the conflict. The harsh reality of the war became evident on December 25th, when the Germans in Stalingrad faced their last meat rations, leading to the slaughter of over 12,000 horses to sustain the besieged troops amid supply shortages. In response to the growing crisis, on December 27th, Hitler authorized Army Group I and Army Group Don to execute a strategic retreat of 150 kilometers to establish a new defensive line in southern Russia. This decision reflected the grim recognition of the deteriorating situation and the need to consolidate the German forces in the face of the relentless Soviet advance. As the battle for Stalingrad intensified, Soviet forces amassed a formidable army of 7 armies with the sole aim of crushing the German presence in the city. However, before unleashing their full attack, the Soviets offered one last chance to avoid imminent defeat. On January 8, 1943, 3 Russian emissaries with a white flag approached the German lines to present the terms of surrender. Despite the gravity of the situation, General Paulus, acting under direct orders from Hitler, reluctantly rejected the offer. Consequently, just 2 days later, the Russians unleashed a relentless bombardment with 5,000 artillery guns, followed by a massive infantry assault. A week later, the conflict again degenerated into a brutal street battle in which the Russians paid a high price in blood for every inch of ground recovered. However, despite their fierce resistance, the Sixth Army found itself on the verge of total collapse, with a severe shortage of food and ammunition for the exhausted troops, who were now confined to 2 narrow pockets within the devastated city. As desperation increased, on January 24, 1943, the Russians offered another opportunity to surrender. This time, General Paulus, recognizing the dire situation facing his remaining troops, sent a personal petition to Hitler requesting immediate permission to surrender in an attempt to save the lives of the exhausted soldiers. Faced with this terrible situation, on January 10th, the Soviets launched another offensive codenamed Operation Ring, with the aim of tightening the siege around the German forces entrenched in Stalingrad, Russia. This operation involved a determined effort to further isolate and ultimately annihilate the Sixth Army. As the Soviet offensive gained momentum, significant events unfolded in the following days. On January 16, 1943, Soviet troops achieved a major victory by capturing the Potomac airfield, located west of Stalingrad. This strategic conquest was a severe blow to the Germans, as it deprived them of vital supply routes and hindered their ability to transport supplies by air and evacuate wounded soldiers. On January 17, 1943, a significant event occurred when the last remaining Junkers Ju-52 aircraft were sent to the Potomac airfield, but upon arrival, they found that the airfield was already in Soviet hands, so the aircraft did not attempt to land. This event marked a crucial moment that led to the urgent redeployment of Luftwaffe fighters from Potomac to Gumrak Airport to avoid being captured by advancing Soviet forces. January 17th stands out as the only day that fighters occupied the runway at Gumrak Airport, highlighting the changing dynamics and urgent needs faced by the Luftwaffe amid changing battlefield conditions. The following day, January 18th, a dramatic and ultimately futile attempt by 3 He-111 transport aircraft from the German Luftwaffe to land at the small GCK airfield in Stalingrad highlighted the desperate and precarious situation facing the besieged German forces. Despite valiant efforts, only 1 aircraft managed to land successfully, while the others were forced to jettison their cargo or abandon landing attempts amid the treacherous conditions and prevailing chaos. On January 22nd, German engineers reported that the small Stalingradskaya airfield, located near the city center, was considered operational for transport aircraft. However, their optimism was short-lived, as subsequent arrivals of E-111 aircraft resulted in disaster, as several suffered fatal damage due to the landing gear getting caught in bomb craters on the runway. The last chance to escape was at the Gumrak airfield, a distant ray of hope in a sea of despair. As we stumbled towards it, the wind whipped at our tattered uniforms, and the urgency was palpable. Each step was a battle against the Soviet advance, a desperate race against time. The scene that greeted us was one of total chaos. Thousands of men, with faces marked by exhaustion and fear, rushed towards the planes that awaited them like moths drawn to a flame. We knew what awaited us if we stayed there: the relentless onslaught of Soviet firepower, the slow descent into oblivion. But in the midst of the madness, there were those who had already succumbed to despair. I remember a soldier with blackened and frozen hands, frantically digging in the snow with fingers that seemed barely human. His eyes were wide with madness, and his desperate cries were lost in the cacophony of war as we struggled to make our way to the planes that awaited us. The air was heavy with the stench of despair. German soldiers pushed and shoved, twisted by fear and determination. But for each man who managed to get on a plane, there were countless others who were left behind, with their dreams of escape shattered by the cruel hand of destiny. The scenes from the last flight were madness. The first-hand accounts are appalling. It was a pit of pure madness and desperation. The situation, increasingly deteriorated, reached a critical point on January 23rd, when the German defenses of the aerodrome fell and Soviet troops took control of the German aerodrome of Gumrak on the western outskirts of Stalingrad. The aerodrome was covered with corpses and hundreds of pieces of German equipment. This loss further aggravated the logistical problems faced by the surrounded German forces, exacerbating their dire situation. Hitler's response to the last request for surrender was, "Unconditional surrender is prohibited. The Sixth Army will maintain its position until the last man and the last bullet, and with its heroic resistance will make an unforgettable contribution to establishing a defensive front and to the salvation of the Western world." In a new attempt to reinforce morale and inspire a last, defiant resistance, Hitler granted more than 100 promotions on the ground to members of the Sixth Army, including General Paulus, who was elevated to the rank of Field Marshal. This symbolic gesture aimed to instill a sense of duty, honor, and determination in Paulus and his staff, hoping to ensure their unwavering commitment to resistance, even in the face of an overwhelmingly unfavorable situation. Hitler's decision to promote Paulus to Field Marshal was also strategic, since he knew that no German Field Marshal had been captured alive, which reinforced the expectation of a heroic and dignified end instead of capture. On January 25th, the remains of the 6th German Army were found divided into two isolated pockets within the limits of Stalingrad, one to the north and one to the south. On January 28th, the German forces in Stalingrad faced greater fragmentation as Soviet attacks divided them into three pockets. In response to this desperate situation, Hermann Göring, in a message to Friedrich Paulus, recognized the firm defense of the German troops and highlighted that their unwavering determination, even if it meant sacrifice, would be remembered as one of the most heroic stories in German history. On January 30th, in Germany, Hermann Göring publicly echoed this sentiment and recognized the defense and sacrifice at Stalingrad as a heroic chapter destined to be remembered in history. Meanwhile, Soviet troops made significant advances and reached the Red Square in the center of Stalingrad on the same day that the following day, January 31st, the southern half of the 6th German Army, exhausted of food and ammunition, surrendered. The last radio transmission from this pocket, sent at 1945 hours, concluded with the abbreviation CEL, meaning the station's closure, in a desperate attempt to support the groups of troops that remained in the northern pocket. 110 German transport planes took off with supplies despite dangerous circumstances. More than 90 of these planes successfully located the illuminated triangular area and released their vital cargo on February 1st, 1943. Friedrich Paulus, trapped among the ruins of a department store in Stalingrad, Russia, made the historic decision to surrender the southern pocket of the city along with 14 of his generals. This moment marked a milestone, as Paulus became the first German field marshal to surrender to an enemy force. While the southern pocket capitulated, fighting continued in the northern pocket. Despite the ongoing conflict, 85 of the 10 transport planes sent to launch supplies to the northern pocket successfully completed their mission the next day. February 2nd, 1943, witnessed the surrender of the last remains of the 6th German Army in Stalingrad. Simultaneously, a German reconnaissance plane was sent to fly over Stalingrad and confirm the cessation of all hostilities on February 3rd, 1943. 12 Heinhund planes loaded with supplies flew over the northern pocket of Stalingrad before dawn, but of the 11 planes that reached the planned launch area, only 3 managed to release part of their cargo, as they found no German activity in the area. Even amid the overwhelming wave of surrenders, pockets of resistance persisted among some German soldiers who preferred to fight to the end rather than face capture. Soviet documents attest to the need to eliminate these pockets of resistance, as some fanatical groups refused surrender. It is likely that for these soldiers the prospect of surrender meant facing captivity in Siberia, a fate considered worse than death. In a moving case, a soldier wrote a last letter to his parents detailing his determination to continue fighting despite the shortage of ammunition and the somber prospects. He described how he had exhausted the last bullets from his MP-40 and stood firm in the northern pocket, refusing to surrender. For these soldiers, surrender was not simply an option. It was an inconceivable betrayal of their duty and principles. On February 3rd, 1943, the Dirac command of the German OKW issued a solemn statement to the German people in which the news of the devastating defeat suffered in Stalingrad, Russia, was given. The message, broadcast on the radio, was preceded by a somber drum roll that created an atmosphere of great solemnity. After the announcement, the broadcast concluded with the moving notes of the second movement of Ludwig van Beethoven's famous Fifth Symphony, underscoring the gravity of the moment. The following day, February 4th, began a 3-day period of national mourning in Germany in response to the catastrophic outcome of the Battle of Stalingrad. As a symbol of collective pain and reflection, all theaters, cinemas, and nightclubs throughout the country closed, reflecting the solemnity of the occasion and the magnitude of the loss. On March 26, 1943, Adolf Hitler communicated to Benito Mussolini his belief that the Battle of Stalingrad had dealt a devastating blow to the Soviet Union, stating that the final fall was inevitable and would mark a turning point in the war. This sentiment reflected the illusions and optimism about the strategic importance of the battle. Despite the monumental losses suffered by the German forces of the original 285,000 soldiers that made up the Sixth Army, 165,000 perished on the gruesome battlefields of Stalingrad. Another 29,000 wounded and battered were flown out for medical attention, and the remaining 91,000 survivors, including 24 generals and 2,500 officers, embarked on a somber journey across the snow-covered landscape. Destined to spend years of captivity in the Russian camps in the relentless expanse of Siberia. Tragically, only a small portion of these survivors, approximately 5,000, would see their homes again. The brutal conditions of the Russian camps, aggravated by the vengeful treatment inflicted by Soviet forces, took a heavy toll on the prisoners. The Russians, well aware of the difficult situation of their own captive soldiers in Germany, inflicted similar hardships on their German counterparts, perpetuating a cycle of suffering and revenge amid the ravages of war. The defeat of the Sixth Army was a devastating blow to the German war effort, as it was not only the first defeat suffered by the Germans, but also the most significant to that point, as they had some of the best troops. The capitulation of the Sixth Army in Stalingrad shattered the myth of invincibility that surrounded the German army. After the Soviet victory at Stalingrad, the entire German war machine was forced to go on the defensive, withdrawing from territories previously considered impregnable. The repercussions of this defeat spread throughout German society, shaking the faith of both the population and the high command in Hitler's leadership. Families throughout Germany were directly affected, either by mourning the loss of loved ones who perished in the battle or by knowing someone who had. Collective pain and disillusionment spread throughout the nation, as the previously unwavering confidence in Hitler and the war effort began to erode after the catastrophe at Stalingrad. With more than 2 million victims, the Battle of Stalingrad stands as the largest and most brutal conflict in mankind's history. It was not just a confrontation between German and Soviet forces. The blood spilled in this titanic fight included soldiers from a multitude of nations, among them Ukrainians, Romanians, Italians, Hungarians, and Croatians, who also contributed to the astonishing number of lives lost in the middle of the chaos and the carnage. It is essential to honor and pay homage to all those who fought and perished regardless of loyalty. The Soviet forces, in particular, demonstrated an unparalleled resistance and unprecedented determination when defending their homeland against the relentless attack of the Axis powers. Their unwavering commitment to victory was ultimately successful, albeit at a tremendous cost in lives. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, we conclude our journey through history. I invite you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Your opinions are always valued and appreciated. Thank you for joining me on this historical journey. Your presence has enriched the experience. Do not forget to show your support by pressing the like button and subscribing to the channel. Your participation helps it grow and thrive. A special thank you to my Patreon sponsors for their continued generosity. Your contributions make a real difference. Do not forget to visit our Patreon and Instagram via the links below for more content and updates. Until next time, I hope to embark on our next adventure together. See you soon.